Well, Jim, more sad news this week, and it is still a developing story, but as of this morning, I believe still, Barry Windham is in an ICU in a hospital in Florida, having various health ailments. A GoFundMe has been set up by his family, I believe by his niece. And of course, you were around Barry Windham during some of those great years when he was, if he wasn't the best wrestler in the business, he was in the conversation. So what are your thoughts about all this Barry Windham news?
Oh, again, I hated to hear that. It was just a couple of days ago. And apparently, the news story that I saw said he had had a heart attack like 10 years ago or somewhere in that time frame and had gone through some type of, lengthy, recovery or rehabilitation or whatever off of that. And because I'm 61, he's 62. And, again, I'm like, it used to be, the people when they get old now, it's like, oh, shit. But you were right. He was definitely at one point in time the best babyface in the business, without question. Was Flair still the best heel, and then pick it from there? And and there was another couple of people in the talk, but not many. But he's just so good, and that's the thing. He grew up around the business because he was obviously the son of Blackjack Mulligan. But he was another guy who was so natural, you couldn't teach that. And most people that grew up around the business, even knowing how to look at it and with a critical eye from being a teenager, and they still couldn't do that type of thing with their bodies. The coordination and the smoothness that he had. And for a guy that size, was he 6'6" or 6'7", thereabouts, 260, 270. He was, a thin, lithe, as they say. He wasn't a bodybuilder, but he was in great shape, cardio. He could go all night. I never saw him to the point where, he was blown up and looking for any kind of rest, even with fucking Flair. But just the coordination and just the natural ability he had to take the bump that you wouldn't think, again, a guy with that kind of size and that kind of body, would take, or the over the top rope bump where he never even grabbed anything. He would just able to get drop kicked and turn. And because he was so tall, the top rope was at his waist, and he would just bend over forward and go over the top rope and roll off the rolling bumps that were, he didn't need to touch anything. He just used his body to turn himself in the air. It was cool to watch. And it looked at the same time like he was completely out of control. But, painfully thin when he first got into business. And that's the problem Kendall had also, his brother, was that if everybody remembers Blackjack, he had already played in the NFL, and, Bob Windham, and was fucking huge, 300 and something pounds when he first started in the business. His sons were thinner, but then the problem becomes, I think, the genes take over. And the last time I saw Kendall was at one of the Charlotte Fan Fests, I think like 6 or 7 years ago. And he was the size Barry, remember how thin Kendall was? He was the size that Barry used to be in the old days, like 275 pounds. And Barry had to be, 325 or 30 or 40 or whatever the fuck it was. So I think that, the Windham genes, caught up with them when they stopped being more physically active. But yeah, Barry, the best trilogy, everybody talks about Flair and Steamboat in 89, but Flair and Windham in 80, what was it, 6 and 7? They started the Battle of the Belts in Tampa, the Crockett Cup in Baltimore, and what was the other? Or the Battle of Belts was St. Pete.
Battle of the Belts was 86. Obviously, Crockett Cup was 87.
The Crockett Cup was 87. There was one more really. Oh, the Worldwide.
The Worldwide match. I went the whole show.
Yeah. I mean, those were in their own way as good as Flair and Steamboat. And in some ways, they were, even better because I think that's the one thing a lot of guys in the business at the time with Steamboat, you say his selling was pretty and his moves were pretty because he was so smooth and some of the guy like Ole would knock ass pretty. But it was a different way of communicating pain, but Barry's fights were grittier. And so in some cases, I think that, BW and Rick overachieved their Flair and Steamboat's trilogy. But anyway, I mean, I've told this story before also, but because when he'd get in the ring with Bobby Eaton, then, when we would work a program with Barry and Ronnie Garvin during that time they were a tag team in 87 also. At the same time he's having all these great matches, a lot of his regular run was with Ronnie against the Midnight for the U.S. Tag Team title, and then he's doing other shit, and then by the next year he switched heel. I mean, he was figured in all the time. Dusty loved him because of that kind of work, who wouldn't? But when he'd get in the ring with Bobby Eaton, on spot shows, they would amuse themselves because they were both so good and so natural and so effortless that they would just fuck around and nobody would know. They would have matches on their knees. Somewhere or another, fucking Bobby would end up on his knees begging, and Barry would grab his arm, and Barry'd go down to a knee and arm drag Bobby off his knees. And then, goddamn, they'd start doing a thing where Bobby would hit the ropes out of a headlock on his knees, but he'd hit the second rope and come back, and fucking Barry would pick him up for a scoop slam while Barry was on his knees. And they would have matches like giving each other a handicap to make it a little more difficult. The people wouldn't know the fucking difference. It all looked natural, like they were jockeying for position somehow. And neither one had time to get off their fucking knees. It's a goddamn thing I've ever seen. I wish they'd actually videotaped any of the house shows back in those days. We were doing this in fucking Covington, Virginia. But again, that's why I think Barry by the late 90s, and they tried that fucking stalker thing at that one point where Vince tried to make it, because he found out Barry liked to hunt down in the woods in Florida or whatever. So suddenly he was a face painted, I don't know what, the son of Skinner, and jacking around with different gimmicks and everything. The WWF crowd never really got a chance to see Barry, but by that point also he'd been in the business. He started in 79 or 80, because Flair and Blackjack had bought Knoxville, and Barry started as Blackjack Mulligan Jr., and he was about 3 inches around, but he was only 19 at that point. So, he by the time that the WWF run, couple of them happened in the 90s, he'd been in the business almost 20 years. He had hurt knees several times, and I think he just after the early 90s lost a lot of his motivation.
Around the same time his knees went out.
Yeah. And when you have knee problems, and then he was in the middle of the WCW Turner Broadcasting era, and nobody was happy anywhere. And I think it wasn't the last major run he had down there. Wasn't he part of they made the West Texas Rednecks, right? Him and like Duncombe Jr. and some of the other guys that did the rap is crap thing and ended up getting over his heels because everybody was sick of the rappers.
Him, Duncan Jr., Kendall, and Kurt Hennig.
Yeah. And that was probably worth the price of admission, riding in a car with those guys just for Barry and fucking Kurt.
There are so many what ifs around Barry, like at different points in his career. What if he had stayed with Dusty in 84? What if he had not left Vince McMahon in 85? What if, it's one after another. What if he had not quit at the beginning of 89?
Yeah.
To do nothing over there, because again, that's the period of time where his dad and his brother got into trouble, and that may have played a part in that. There's so many what ifs for a guy who was one of the most talented guys for at least half of the 80s. You have to say he was top tier.
Well, and, and that's the thing, though, he inherited from Blackjack, that the Windhams would give notice and leave, or just leave possibly sometimes without giving notice if they wanted to. And sometimes it was like, Jesus Christ, you just got here. And because he left, Dusty was going to, always have BW as his right-hand man. But then he left to go to New York just long enough for Dusty to get Magnum. But then he left New York and kept, okay, well, that's the same. Magnum had just had his accident. So now we got BW back. But that didn't last. And then Dusty was gone, and then blah, blah, blah. And he would go back and forth on, I won't say a whim, but it didn't seem like there was a lot of thought put into it when all the other territories had gone away and you were, working on your third resignation from each of the ones that were left. But nevertheless, I saw a report that, they may have done some type of surgery. I don't know if that's like a bypass or opening up a, blockage or whatever they do. But yeah, geez, I certainly hope he gets, whatever treatment and gets better. But, I guess, didn't Blackjack have heart issues also? Maybe it's a genetic thing and you got to watch that. Yeah, I know. I keep an eye on mine all the time. I have to get in front of one of those Grinch things to magnify it so I can see it. But so anyway, we certainly hope everything works out. And then they do have the GoFundMe page on the GoFundMe thing. And I think some of, because, the Windham family in some way or another touched a lot of different people in the business. And, a lot of people looked up to either Barry's dad or Barry's generation or whatever, and now Bray Wyatt. So anyway, hopefully everything works out.
Hopefully someone can point Bray Wyatt in the direction of that GoFundMe for his uncle. But Jim,
it would seem like that he could probably chip in at this point with his recent success.
Jim, let's end this segment on a little bit of a upbeat note. You growing up so close to Cincinnati, today's the 75th birthday, as we are recording, of Johnny Bench, Cincinnati Reds catcher. Was he a big deal when you were a kid?
I was never a baseball fan. But having said that, in the days of the Pete Rose, Johnny Bench era, even on our local television, local news, you couldn't get away from Cincinnati Reds. And also Aunt Lola lived up in Covington, right across the river from Cincinnati. So every time I would go up there and see their news, I mean, those names, that was the biggest thing in Cincinnati. And at the time, Louisville didn't have any professional sports except wrestling. So, the Cincinnati Reds, in effect, were our baseball team, because that was the closest one to it. It's 90 miles, as the crow flies, or as the pop-up flies. But yes, Johnny Bench was a big deal. And Pete Rose especially was, because Pete Rose was an even bigger star back in those days on the team than Johnny Bench was. But you heard all of those names regularly. And what was the old woman that owned the team?
Marge Schott.
Marge Schott. She was mentioned quite often, as I remember it.
The Kanye West of the 90s.
The last few years of mentions of her weren't kindly, and she was like this surly old woman that you could just see fucking smoking a cigar and fucking hanging around with Mae Young.
A racist anti-Semitic who would have a dog named Shotzi that she would force players to kiss.
Shotzi. Yes, I remember. She's always holding Shotzi in her arm. Yes.
Well, perhaps you're a big fan of the Cincinnati Reds and you'd like to see pictures of the Big Red Machine, Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, George Foster, all the rest. Or perhaps you're a fan of racist dogs like Shotzi. Whatever it is, we know where you can house these pictures in a fun way that the whole family can enjoy, and that's with our friends at Skylight Frame.
We know where you can put those pictures. I'll tell you what. By the way, the Big Red Machine was what they called the Cincinnati Reds, and the Big Red Machine cane gave Pete Rose a tombstone. See how these weird, wild, wacky, wonderful things happen in this world, and you always want to remember them. And that's why you take pictures, and you put pictures up in your house, and you look at the pictures to remember the thing that you did when you took the picture of it. And that's the way you can do it now with space-age modern technology, folks, and our friends at Skylight Frames. What have we said about this thing? It's an old favorite of many of the listeners, and they're back because it's a holiday season. Perfect time to remember your family or to put pictures up of people that you want to be on the lookout for. If you see this person, call the authorities. Whatever you want to use this thing for, the Skylight Frame is a beautiful picture frame, not just for one frame, ladies and gentlemen, or not one picture, but for many pictures, because it's the modern technology. It's connected to the wireless network, and you can email an app to people for this thing. And all you people know how to use the apps and the emails. It's a black and white, or black frame, a white mat, matches anything. Black and white goes with anything. Just look at the piano. And you've got two size options to choose from, either the original big 10-inch or the brand new extra large 15-inch. That's if you want to have pictures larger than 10 inches, they'll fit in the 15-inch. And you know why they'll fit? Because you'll be able to load them there.
Well,
you just, what?
The pictures will fit in either frame. They're digital pictures. It's a wonderful digital frame.
Yeah, but they'll fit better in the 15-inch because they'll be bigger.
Well, no, they'll fit perfectly in both, not better in one or the other.
Well, bigger's always better. Haven't you heard that? Size matters. If I were you people, I'd get the big 15-inch one instead of the original 10-inch. That's just me. But nevertheless,
it's how you use it.
It's how you use it. It's where you hang it. And if you're hung right, everything else falls into place. So what you do is you take this, now, Matthew, I'm trying to tell you, you take this frame and you load pictures on it. You get on the wireless network, you connect to the app, and you email pictures to this Skylight Frame, and they pop up in seconds. And you can do the slideshow where just picture after picture goes by. So it's sort of like identifying mug shots in the police station. You just flip through it until you've seen every criminal that you know.
It's like seeing pictures of your family. You shouldn't really necessarily associate this with criminals.
Hey, who are you to call these people's family criminals?
I'm not. I'm saying they're not criminals. You're saying they're criminals.
Well, you said they were your family.
Who would put pictures of criminals in their house?
Detectives.
They would put pictures of criminals in their house so they're constantly reminded of them?
Practice.
Practice what?
Practice detecting. Anyway, and the other people can do this also, not strangers at random, although that would be cool. You know what? Go and write down your code and your app on a bathroom wall and say, send me pictures, and see what you get.
Bad idea.
I bet it'd be entertaining.
Don't do that.
Don't do that? All right, don't do that. Just kids.
You could do that, but everyone else don't do that.
Kids, go ahead and do that without asking your parents' permission. But anyway, and other people can send them as well. Like I said, if you want to say, hey, Grandma Susie, you need to send a picture of you back in the old days on the beach in a string bikini to little Oshkosh over here. He's never seen you before. Whatever the case may be, family members can contribute to this thing, whoever's got possession of it. You can send pictures willy-nilly to it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Technology in action. And the kids will love it. It moves and lights up and, does the whole thing. There's movement and light. So all the cats will love it. The dogs will love it. The kids will love it. Your husband might get sick of it after a while, but nevertheless, pictures of loved ones on the Skylight Frame. And right now, if you go to Skylight, that's SKYLIGHT, skylightframe.com, and enter the code DRIVE, DRIVE, you're going to get $15 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame. $15 off one of these things. They're practically giving it away. Skylightframe.com, promo code DRIVE. For $15 off the purchase of a Skylight Frame to make everybody in the family and your friends happy. Give some to your neighbors. Give one to your neighbor and put a nice picture of your family, and they'll stick it on the shelf. And then if your neighbor ever pisses you off, is a bad neighbor, doesn't keep their yard up, blows their leaves over on yours, then you can send a picture of your dick and just say, fuck you to your neighbor.
There's no need for any of that, but give it to people you care about, people you love, and of course, get one for yourself, skylight frame.
Or a picture of your ass. If you bend over, pull your pants down, and write kiss on one cheek and my on the other cheek, take a picture of it and send it to your neighbor's skylight frame.
All right, well, obviously we don't encourage that. But get skylight frame, and Jim, let's move on with the show to the things we do encourage, which are questions about wrestling.
All righty.